I'm here in Denver with Sherry Weddell, who is the co-director and co-founder of the Catherine of Siena Institute. You may know of the Catherine of Siena Institute through its great work in spiritual gifts discernment. And Sherry's written a book in the last few years called Forming Intentional Disciples, which has created what I call a welcome shockwave in the Catholic Church, at least in North America, and I'm sure beyond as well. And so I have a chance to talk to Sherry about her book and how it might be significant for us in Vancouver. So welcome, Sherry.
Thank you, thank you.
Could you tell us about where the book came from?
Basically, I was already beginning to outline the book. It came out of our work. Our work in evangelization came out of our work in gifts discernment, because we realized many of the people we were dealing with couldn't discern the charisms because they didn't yet have a living relationship with God. And so I was starting to sketch out a book in July of 2011. And then an editor that had been speaking to me for a couple of years from OSV, our Sunday visitor, wrote out of the blue and said, "Oh, I know, Sherry, it's probably dumb, but, do you have any time? Now you always tell me you have no time." I said, "Actually, this is a good time, but I'm already starting this book on evangelization. When I finish it," I said, "I can do your book on discernment." And she said, "Oh, no, give us everything you have." So that was literally, I sent it in at 6:30 a.m., or something very early in the morning, scrambled, tried to clean it up, make it look respectable, and then sent it off to her, and at 2:30 in the afternoon, I got a phone call and said, "We want it."
Wow.
So my whole life revolved on a dime. I mean, publishers do not buy books in 8-hour time frames. But I now had to rearrange my entire life because I had to write it in 5 months and get the manuscript in by early January.
Wow. Wow. And Sherry was sharing with me, as she said, her life turned on a dime through this. I think it kind of shot her unwittingly into the stratosphere, so to speak. For example, you can find a commentary by Father Robert Barron online on her book and its merits. So what I hear from people who read this book is a number of things, and I recommend it widely. Things such as wow, or incredulity even, or yes, that's language that's describing something that I know to be true, which is very significant. So could you talk about some of the key parts of this book that are causing this shockwave?
People, say things like, "It's like you're reading my diary." It's like you're present in every conversation I had on the topic in the last 4 years. And that's just because we were all wrestling with the same thing. That's why it's so familiar. But basically, I talk about the fact that the majority of Catholics are not yet intentional disciples. So we go over some of the studies. There's lots and lots of studies that have been done in that area.
And can I pause you? So by intentional disciples, what do you mean? And is that in North America? Is that America? Is that globally?
Well, I suspect it's global, but of course we've worked mostly in the U.S. So though people tell me now, since the book has come out, wherever I go, including Europe and Australia and New Zealand and all those places, and they'll say, "Yes, it works for us. This sounds like us." But I'm letting them make that judgment. I don't know for sure. What I was speaking specifically to was the American scene, which is where we have worked very extensively, because we've worked in well over 500 parishes in 130 dioceses, and 3/4 of them were in this country. But we had done also quite a bit of work in Vancouver in the early days, because we started in Seattle, so we used to just pop across the border. Beautiful, beautiful place. Of course, my Father Michael Sweeney, my co-founder, who's a native of Vancouver, used to call Seattle Vancouver's ugly stepsister. But he was, of course, a Canadian xenophobe. So anyway.
Very good. So what is the definition in your book?
The definition of intentional disciple is someone who is consciously, deliberately seeking to follow Jesus Christ as his disciple in the midst of his church.
Okay.
So not a saint, not mature, not got their life all together, none of that stuff, but at least they've begun the journey.
Okay.
So
can you be a regular, faithful Mass attendee and not be an intentional disciple based on your research and experience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the turning point for me was actually doing a gifts discernment interview in Canada with a woman leader who was president of various organizations and whatnot.
Catholic organizations.
Catholic organizations. Oh yeah, she was very, very active in the parish and the diocese, and And I wasn't getting anywhere in her interview. In the interview process, I asked people to tell me stories, and she wasn't able to tell me concrete stories. And so finally, in desperation, I asked her a question I never asked before, which is, can you describe to me your lived relationship with God to this point in your life? The reason I did that was because charisms typically don't manifest until the point when your faith becomes personal.
Mm.
So I thought if I could find her turning point, then I'll know where to look in her life.
Mm.
Well, she actually thought for a moment. She was very thoughtful, and then she said, well, I don't have a relationship with God. And that was such a stunning answer. I spent the rest of the hour, I was certain she had to have one. I was certain there had to be spiritual motivation for her activity in the church. And at the end of the hour, I realized she'd been telling me the truth in the first place. Obviously, God has a relationship with her, or she would not exist.
Right.
But as far as she was concerned, on her side, she did not believe she had a relationship with God. I came out of that interview, I went to my co-director, Father Mike Phones, in those days, and said, that is the most amazing interview I've ever had. Maybe we should ask this question more often.
Wow.
And we started to do that, and then the most stunning things would roll out of leaders' mouths. And that was our first wake-up call. So yes, we know from long experience, and now the book is out, leaders at the parish and diocesan level, especially the diocesan level. I mean, I was at a invitation-only evangelization conference last year. 120 leaders in this conference room, very nice. Some of them, if I named them, you would all know them. They're very famous. Then there was me, the new girl in the block, and some bishops and people, those sorts of people, okay. 2 hours into it, one of these leaders came up to me and said, until I read your book, I did not know I could have a personal relationship with God.
Wow.
And I've had that said to me by leaders all over the country. So yes, because we do what we do for a lot of different reasons, and there are a lot of reasons to be involved at the parish. Maybe you want to be part of a neighborhood community. Maybe you want to do community service of some kind, or you were raised Catholic and you feel somehow a good person should go to Mass, or there's any number of reasons for why people do it.
Wow, I mean, there's 1,000 things I could ask you about in this interview because your book is so fascinating and so important. Just a few things. You mentioned that on average, when you ask a parish priest in your experience, and this is across many parishes and dioceses and continents even, the average response to your question of how many of your regular parishioners are intentional disciples, what's the answer that is in
The
your book?
answer we've gotten from 1,600 leaders from 60 different dioceses consistently over the years was 5%. And this was their estimate. It's not a study, it's not scientific, but I was trying to just draw on their pastoral experience because here I had people with thousands of years of pastoral experience, in front of me. And I thought, well, golly, let's find out what they think. We didn't know what they would say. I mean, it was really an experiment. And I was stunned, especially when the answer came year after year after year. And finally, I asked my own pastor at home, who is dean of the clergy, been in the parish for over 30 years, knows everybody. I mean, he built the parish. He knows everybody. I thought surely he'd know. And I asked him the same question, and didn't know about this. He hadn't been part of it. And his answer, it was really interesting. He says, well, I've got a lot of good people, and they do a lot of good things, and, and they have spiritual longings, and I'd say 5%.
Wow. Amazing. In the Archdiocese of Vancouver, as you know from what I shared with you yesterday, we have about 480,000 Catholics based on government census data. Based on our own internal surveys, annually we have just under 90,000 regular Mass goers based on head counts at a couple of Masses. So that's about 20%.
Right.
So what you're saying, if what you've observed is true and is the same in Vancouver, which I have no reason to not think it is, based on your vast experience, so that would be 5% of the 20%.
Well, not
true?
Necessarily.
Okay.
What we're looking at is they were judging people that showed up enough so they had some idea who they were.
Okay.
And that could include what in the United States is called a practicing. And practicing only means you show up once a month.
Okay.
So I tend to use the show up once a month standard instead of the who's actually in the pews on a given Sunday standard.
Okay.
So in the United States, that's like 35 million people or so who would show up at least once a month. There's about half of those are actually in the pews on a given Sunday.
Wow.
So it's 5% of the larger figure, whatever that would be for you.
Okay, amazing. In your book, I'm looking at some of the chapter headings. You talk about, well, let's focus the rest of our time on, for just a minute or so, on the thresholds of conversion. So, by way of introduction, a book was written called I Once Was Lost by some evangelical campus missionaries in the U.S., observing their experience of evangelizing over decades, postmodern university students. And they discerned these stages that people went through that were consistent across all kinds of different criteria, from them going from having no conscious relationship with God to giving their yes to Christ. Of course, it wasn't in the Catholic milieu, but nevertheless, they chose to follow the Lord consciously. So tell us about what you've done in your book about the thresholds and why it's significant.
Well, I first came across the thresholds long before their book was out. I found one of Doug Schopp's original papers that he was given it was an informal paper that he was given just to his colleagues on what they were discovering. But as soon as I saw it, I said, whoa. And then when the book came out, we sold hundreds and hundreds of copies because before I wrote the book ourselves. The difference, the problem with that, and of course I'm from the evangelical world originally, so I understood their context, but it doesn't fit very well when you're working in Catholic parishes. There's all sorts of factors that we have that are not there for them. And so, but we had been working already with the thresholds before the book for about 8 years. Because it named, immediately I thought, this is what names we all have been wrestling with. We know, like my pastor said, we know the Holy Spirit is at work in people's lives. We know they're sometimes searching, maybe without language, or there's something going on there, but we also know it's not yet discipleship. And so you can affirm what God is already doing, you can affirm the yeses they've already made, and you can still say there's more.
Okay, so very briefly, in a nutshell, what are the thresholds?
The thresholds are basically stages. The idea is in the 21st century, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I think I'm going to be a disciple today, right? Most of us make these journeys in a set of stages. And what they found when they interviewed 37 students who'd all gone through a conversion in 1 year, they discovered they'd all passed through these same stages of trust, curiosity, openness, seeking, and intentional discipleship. And then they, as you said, they worked with thousands of more students, but we have also found that incredibly helpful. It fits Catholic spiritual theology. It fits what almost all of us have experienced. Not that it's the only way to talk about this by any means, but it's a very useful field-tested way. And so that's why I have 4 chapters in there on the thresholds and their significance. So in terms of like RCIA, in terms of our catechetical, sacramental prep, catechesis, all sorts of things, and then filling in the Catholic theology and practice, and it's especially the relationship of personal faith and the sacraments and sacramental grace, all that sort of thing, which are huge issues for us. And we've found that the thresholds is one of the, if I could teach every priest and every leader in America 2 things, one would be
North America,
to identify these thresholds of conversion and understand them, be able to hear them in people's stories so that you can meet them where they are and help them continue the conversation. And that would be one of them.
Okay, I was amazed in learning about the thresholds. I first read it in those gentlemen's book and then discovered your book and was so delighted because of how you developed it. And what I learned from that is if a person's at, say, the second threshold, which again? That's
the second threshold would be your curiosity.
Curiosity, starting with basic trust. And trust can be developed by all kinds of things. It might be because you saw as a kid the Charlie Brown Christmas story, or you had an uncle who was a Catholic, or you just like the nativity story. It doesn't mean you have to have anything
You don't
more.
even have to believe any of that. Maybe you just like, I just like you.
Right, your friend, who has some
I think
attachment.
his beliefs are nuts, and of course he may be nuts too, but I like him. I have a bridge of trust there with him personally. So, it may just be their relationship with you that is the bridge.
Okay, so let's say that's stage 1. Stage 2 is curiosity. Now you're actually, what is this? Who is this Jesus and the faith all about? If a person is in that stage 1 or 2, and you're working with them in some context, and you do things that presuppose, say, stage 4 or 5, namely, they're open to changing, and they're open to following Jesus, it's going to misfire for lack of it. You're not going to meet them where they're at.
It
right?
certainly can be, because of course curiosity is essentially casual. It's like casual dating.
Mm.
So it's sort of like, hey, you're interesting, but am I ready for a commitment? Absolutely not.
Mhm.
I'm just exploring this very open-endedly. I'm making no commitments. So yeah, if we don't understand, and sometimes, and often people with curiosity need a lot of space
Mm.
to express their curiosity with, and not being overwhelmed by us coming on like a 10-ton, and dumping, like Thomas Aquinas on them, or jumping on them, or asking them to sign on the dotted line today.
Catechism.
Yes, you just don't do that. So we
Right.
can actually extinguish the curiosity instead of making it stronger, which is what we want to do.
Wow. Okay. So thank you so much, Sherry, for this time
Mhm.
with you. I would highly encourage anybody to buy and read this book, Forming Intentional Disciples. It's published by our Sunday Visitor. It's not complicated reading, but it's very profound. And lastly, Sherry has a teammate, Keith Strom, coming to the One Conference in February to speak about some of these themes. So we look forward to that as well. So thank you, Sherry, for your time.
Great, thank you.